Sam, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
What brings you to World Water Week 2016?
I lead the Climate Development Knowledge Network, and we've had a long-standing partnership with the Global Water Partnership, which is an amazing network of practitioners who are supporting this whole agenda of improving access to sustainable water supplies. And CDKN has been in the business for the last 7 years of building developing countries' capacity to respond to climate change, to how do leaders in developing countries respond to the gap that they're facing in the response to the current and future threats of climate change. And of course water is on the front, water and agriculture and I suppose energy systems too are some of the frontline issues in relation to climate change. So we've had a great partnership with GWP. I've just come from a meeting here of the African Ministerial Council of Water, AMCAL. 11 African ministers here in a meeting across the room, a fantastic lineup of commitment to addressing the challenges of water supply. And I think that flows from the climate deals. So CDKN was very involved in the Paris climate talks in the preceding years. We've supported developing country negotiators in those groups, the least developed countries, the African group and the small island negotiators, to bring stronger positions into that environment that had been heavily dominated by OECD countries, US, Japan, Russia, Europe had driven that agenda. And I think what we saw in Paris was the emergence of a reasonably fair deal, a commitment to staying within 2 degrees and hopefully 1.5 degrees. So we worked hard to push for that 1.5. But it is only an agreement. It may go into force in the next month through the G20 agreement when China and US sign up, and we'll see that treaty become effect. But what is the treaty going to meaningfully be? It's going to happen in these core sectors, and water is one of them. So I've come here full of expectation to see that implementation, the action, moving from the much conversation, the 20 years that ran into that COP process in COP21 in Paris last December, encouraged the action here, but a very long way to go. So emerging problems on water supply, we're going to have to face more of that. But the alliances, the knowledge, the technologies, the finances that come together in this unique global World Water Week, year after year, I think make this a great place to be.
Interesting point you raised. So what is the delta that's created as a consequence of climate change?
Climate change drives increased variability in the short term of weather events, more droughts and more floods. We're seeing this right around the world concurrently. Southern Africa has just suffered from suffering from an extreme and long drought. There have been a series of floods across the region. That's the short term. In the longer term, increased temperatures of up to 2 degrees or more we're going to see in many parts of Africa. So the challenge of climate change is how do we make that, responding to it, the way we do business. So the agenda post-Paris is not more climate change policy or climate change ministries or climate change laws. All of those things may be necessary. The agenda is how do you mainstream that? So that business as usual in the future is just dealing with climate change. We've learned to adapt as human beings to a whole variety of climates and situations, and we will go on doing that. But we're having to do that at an accelerated pace now as a consequence of climate change. So that's a cost, yes. And we've been looking at an event here at the incremental cost of more resilient infrastructure. What does climate resilient infrastructure in the water sector look like? We hosted an event yesterday, a very exciting event with the African Development Bank and other partners looking at building that kind of infrastructure. We're not at a point yet where that is mainstreamed. We're at a point where the big development banks, the African Development Bank, the World Bank are saying, yes, we're doing this. DFID, which is the major donor support to CDKN, and the other bilateral donors are doing this. But our government ministry is really integrating those current and future threats of climate change into everyday business. There will be a cost, but it's unavoidable. The cost of inaction is so much greater. CDKN commissioned a study in Uganda last year which showed that the cost of inaction is 20 times greater than the cost of adaptation over the next 10 years in that country. So we have to act. Acting early is going to be cheaper than acting later as climate change impacts come in, because we're locked into a certain degree of global warming. These costs will escalate. Act now. So build resilient infrastructure. Don't build what are sometimes called stranded assets, build a power station or build a dam which is not going to be resilient to more variable water flow. This is the discussion. And I think what's interesting is this the end of the big? Is the future the massive small? I think this is an interesting debate that we've been having here. Are we moving to decentralized energy systems? Are we moving to decentralized water infrastructure, smaller, local, community-led or people-led infrastructure to build better water supply and water resources management? So I think that's all that's on the table here. We're at a point of transition, massive transformation coming through in climate change, necessary transformation. The fact that there's 11 ministers here seems to me a real commitment to that change. And those guys, I think there were 2 ladies or maybe 1, those ministers have to drive that transformation, lead their governments. And I think they're doing it. We work across 5 or 6 African countries and we see governments getting on with this. Yes, the international community is supporting, but these Africans are definitely leading this transformation.
So what is CDKN's part to play in all of this?
Providing access to knowledge. We run a global network of experts. We bring in the experts through our alliance to respond to this. We have modest resources for technical assistance. And one of our backbones and our beliefs is you're not going to get scale unless you increase access to the knowledge that underpins this, and that knowledge has to be locally owned. So we've tackled problems in cities or at national level with policies or working on guidelines of adapting to climate change for the Global Water Partnership. That's something that's been adopted by this ministerial group I mentioned earlier. But you can solve the problems, but you need to do 2 other things. One is you have to build the capacity of the institutions, or the capability, the systemic capability of that institution to respond. And secondly, have the knowledge to deal with it. So it's not just about the money. I think there's a sort of sense of, we need more finance. Yes, finance is necessary. The Green Climate Fund and other entities are getting their act together to provide access to new resources. But the institutions have to be there to deal with it, and they have to be domestically rooted institutions, and the knowledge has to be there. So we've supported a lot of learning, a lot of means of communicating through written and video material. We support a whole load of gatherings. We support the African Low Emissions Development Network is something we support. We support a network called the Climate Knowledge Brokers. How are we broking this proliferation of information, and what are the principles that underpin that? It's been a very exciting part of the CDKN partnership. So knowledge, testing things on the ground, and building capability.
So what next?
There's a huge challenge ahead. I mean, CDKN as an institution is evolving, moving to an African-led entity, but working across Latin America, Asia and Africa still, but with an African base. It's about implementing the commitments that were made in Paris, making sure that countries stick to their commitments, and they will be reporting back on a 5-year cycles around the so-called NDCs, the commitments they made there. And we will continue to be there to support and respond to the ongoing gaps in knowledge and capability.
Sam, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.